Alright, hello everybody. This is going to be a tutorial on how to create some big style diagrammatic drawings. We're going to look at this project right here just to kind of get an understanding of how they come up with their ideas and how they simplify some of their larger ideas. This is a project in the UK that's in progress right now. It is a bar building that kind of folds in on itself with a green roof. Let's get into it and see how they describe their project. So starting out, we can see that Big likes to use some context that's more muted or grayed out surrounding the project or the idea. To begin with, they have a bar building right here. They utilize arrows to indicate how this thing is being manipulated. And of course, they have their nice thick silhouette around the edge and some smaller line weights to help define the object's boundaries. The second stage looks like it's folding in on itself. Third image is going to be showing that part of the building is being pulled up and part of the building is being pulled down. Over on this corner, it looks like they're pulling a portion of the building up to showcase some glazing on the bottom, and they populate it with some scale figures to kind of give it a little bit more life. Over here, it looks like they're going to shear off the edge of it to kind of fit in with the context a little bit better, since this is more of a small sliver. And then the final image that they have for the project kind of brings it a little bit more to life. They have a green roof on top, and they colored it green to kind of indicate that. Blue down here is indicating some glazing, and we can see the line work has 3 line weights. Looks like we have a thick silhouette around the edge. We have an intermediate to do those building boundaries, and then we have a more fine detailed line weight that's going to do some smaller details. And then we have little trees that populate it to give it a little bit more life, and some scale figures. So with that being said, let's jump right into it and create some big inspired diagrammatic drawings. So right now in Rhino, I kind of have a surface generated right here that we're going to be manipulating. It's going to be similar to what everybody has right now for their chair surface. So instead of using this as a piece of the building, I'm actually going to utilize this chair surface as topography to make a fictitious building sitting in the context. So right now we have our surface layer over here, intersection layer that has our grid, which we're going to need to help describe a little bit of the topography change. And then it looks like I have an arrow layer, so when we do some arrows in the future, I'm going to make that red right away. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to start out by creating a simple box over here with the box tool. I'm going to hold shift so it's a perfect square, and I'm going to extrude it up just a little bit. So there is our box. I'm going to create a new layer to put that on, and I'm just going to call this building. That's where we're going to put our building. I'm going to have our object selected since it's not in the appropriate layer right now. And I'm going to, in the properties panel, put it in the building layer. Once it's there, I'm also going to change the color of this so I can identify it a little bit easier from the rest of the material. There we go. We got our start of our building. I'm going to move this into position using our gumball tool. So if we have our gumball navigation selected down here, you'll be able to move this object with our arrows and kind of position it to a point where I feel that it's working. So right now I want to be able to see that back edge. I just think that's going to be kind of nice to see. And I'm going to kind of just decrease its scale in a couple directions using the gumball tool just to kind of fit it in slightly better. So I like how that fits right there. Let's do a building intersection with the topography. So we're going to intersect 2 sets. Before I do that, I'm going to create another layer for that building intersection line. And I'm going to double click to make sure I'm in that layer when we generate that. And let's change it to a more visible line weight, or a line color rather. All right, so now that we're in building section, I'm going to intersect two sets. So right there, we're going to select our first object of intersection, then our second object of intersection, and it should generate once it gets in there. I'm going to turn off our grid real quick to make it a little easier to read. Let's do that intersect two sets one more time. Select our first object, second object. So now we can kind of see that there is some line work generated right there. That's going to be important for us to have to manipulate in Illustrator a lot easier. Now I'm going to create a make 2D from this. I'm going to make sure my intersection grid is on. I want that to be in the final output as well. And before we go and finish this off, I'm going to make sure our view is in isometric southwest. Big does axonometrics and isometrics, so that's why we're going to be sticking with this right now. I'm going to make sure I have everything that I want to be exported into Make 2D line work. So it looks like we have our intersection, our grid, our topography surface. If we had arrows, there would be arrows in there. The building and the building intersection. So let's make 2D real quick. Some of the parameters that we're going to want to have checked, make sure we're in our parallel view. We'll just export it from the view. We're going to maintain our source layers. So once all these lines are exported, they will be in the layers that they need to be in. We can have our scene silhouette selected. That's going to put a singular line all the way around the edge. I don't know if it's beneficial for this tutorial because we're going to want a thicker line around our building versus the exterior. But let's just put that in just in case we want to use it and make sure it's group output. All right, let's make 2D on that. So once we have that in a make 2D, I'm going to go to my top view. I just like moving my make 2D in my top view versus my bottom view. One thing that we're going to want to make sure is happening correctly is that all this line work is visible. You can see right here we're coming up short on our grid, and to fix that we can use the extend command. So if we type extend, it's going to ask for a boundary for those lines to end at. I'm going to select that building edge right there, and once I press enter it'll say select curve to extend, and we can just go down the line and extend the curves that are a little too short. Looks like that might be all of the lines that we need to extend for this one. So there's the line work for the first phase. And I like to put that over to the side so it's kind of out of the way. Now for that set of line work, we're going to need a massing on the base of this in the form of a PNG or an image that we can put on the base. So let's go over to our render over here, and I'm just going to kind of view this in render right now just to see what it's looking like. And it looks like it's generating some good shadowing. Right now this is going to be an environment shadow, so it's not going to be super harsh shadows. If we did want to do some more harsh lighting, we could do our sun over here, and maybe we want to decrease the intensity so it's not as washed out. So what's going to be important is we have some of this shadowing on the topography to help us understand how that topography is moving or is shaped. So our intensity right now looks like it's at a 0.2. I'm going to keep that setting for the future. Another piece of information that we're going to want to have selected is a transparent background. So let's do transparent background on that. And let's just see what a 72 DPI render looks like. Depending on the power of your computer, it could take a few seconds or a few minutes to render. So be patient. Don't try to do any other processes in between this. You don't want to freeze up your computer as much as you want. So right now it's kind of looking, I think there's enough shadowing on here in this preview of the render right now. I might want to go in and increase or decrease the intensity so I get a little bit more shadowing, because when I'm in Illustrator, I'm going to change the opacity and make it lighter as a backdrop. So I'm just going to go here and decrease the intensity one more time. Render it again, see what that looks like, see if that change was pretty positive or maybe didn't change at all. And there's a lot of post-processing that you can do over here. Just remember, whatever you do to one of these, you're going to have to do to every single backdrop that you generate. So remember what settings you have for the initial image. And I'm kind of liking that, so I'm gonna go with that for right now. So up here, I'm gonna save image as. I'm gonna make sure it's a PNG. A PNG is going to be, I think, the most appropriate image to use for this. I'm going to create a new folder as well, just to kind of have all these in the same place. I'm just going to say big tutorial folder. And let's call this model 1. So let's save that. So we have our PNG saved for that. We can exit out of this now. And I'm going to go back to my shaded. So now we have a PNG backdrop of this object exported, and we have line weight exported over here. Those are the two pieces that we're going to need for each of these models. Now to kind of be like big, I'm going to go and split this in half and move it a bit. And this is a fictitious building, so we can have some fun with it, make whatever you want. I'm going to turn my intersection off right here, get that grid out of the way so it's a little easier to manipulate. Right now I'm using this line right here as a cutting tool. I'm going to extrude it. We're going to extrude curve command upwards to create a cutting plane. And then I'm going to move this down with the gumball so it's all the way through our cube right there. And then I'm going to do the split command. So we're going to select the object that we want to split. That is the cube. And then we're going to select the cutting object that we want to cut with, which would be this plane. And we'll click enter. I'm going to get rid of this plane right now by deleting it. And now we can see that we have two poly surfaces, or at least two halves of our previous poly surface. I'm going to move this down a little bit, move this over to create kind of a different dynamic situation. I'm going to hide this curve right here. I don't want to delete it because I might need it later, but I'm going to hide that curve right there. And now we can see that there's two open faces on these cubes. A simple command to get those completely closed, or a closed poly surface, we can use the command cap. And once you click cap, it actually fills in those faces for you, so now they're completely closed, which is wonderful. You can go and make your own surface on these 4 points and then join them as one object. If you have cubic forms like this, oftentimes just capping it's going to be the most efficient way to do it. Now that we have those two boxes generated, I'm going to be in my intersection or building intersection layer, and we're going to get those lines generated again for the bottom of this. So let's do intersect two sets one more time. I'm going to select our bottom surface and our two boxes right here. And once I have those selected, now we have our bottom edge line work right there. So it's looking pretty decent. Now that we've sliced this and kind of shifted it down, I'm going to create an arrow to kind of help illustrate that. I'm going to go into my arrow layer just to build this up. I'm going to go from the top down. I like drawing my arrows from the top down. You don't have to create your arrows inside of Rhino. I like to, just because it gives you a little bit more control over your final presentation. So I'm going to start out by just creating an arrow. Let's do 1 inch there. Say 3 inches on the tail end. 1 inch out. I'm going to go 2 inches up. And this is just my way of making an arrow. Everybody can make an arrow however they see fit. But for right now, I like to make them case by case basis. So I have this T right now. I'm going to go into my line command to finish off this polyline. And to have the actual arrow, I'm going to use the split command. I'm going to select this T that we've created. And for our cutting objects, it'll be these two lines. And now we have these pieces that we can get rid of. And it's 3 pieces that remain. And now I'm going to join those lines together. We want this to read as a surface and not just a line weight. So kind of the best way to do it, if you have more than 4 points inside of a curve, we can go over to our surface button over here. If we click this drop down arrow, there's a function called surface from planar curves. If we do that, you can see that we have a surface that's generated. So now we have a curve and a surface. I'm going to select our curve and delete that, and I'm going to work exclusively with the surfaces. So let's go back to our parallel view. I'm going to utilize Gumball just to move this efficiently. I'm going to get this kind of in a good orientation where I think it's describing what's going on effectively. And I like how that looks right now. So we have our newly manipulated building, our arrow, our surface, and our line work right here. So with that being said, let's turn our building or our grid intersection on. And I'm going to export all of this as our Make 2D line work again. So make sure everything's selected that you want Make 2D to make. And let's Make 2D for the second time. All of these settings should be the same, so we don't need to mess with those. Press OK. I'm going to go back to our top view to kind of move them. I just like to drag them out of the way so they're not in my building plane. So now we can see we have our arrow line work, we have our building line work, we have the building edge that we generated, and then we're also going to have some missing information again that we have to clean up before we get done. Let's extend those lines again. I'm going to click this as a boundary line again and go down the line and just extend all of these. This makes your life a lot easier when we go into the Illustrator realm. It also looks like we're missing a piece here for some reason, so I'm going to go through and do the extend command again. I'm going to say this is our boundary line right there and extend that line to fill that in. So with everything said and done, I think our step 2 looks pretty fantastic. Let's go back here. We need to do a PNG background again to get our information ready for exporting. So let's go back into our rendered view just to kind of see what shadowing is going on. It looks pretty decent. I'm going to hide our arrow because I don't really want that shadow to play into anything. So let's just hide that for the output. Let's go back to our render setting. Everything should be set up from the last export that we did. And let's render it real quick. And again, this might take more time for you, less time for you. It's all depending on what kind of power your PC has or your Mac. All right, that looks fairly decent. Again, I'm going to save image as. We're going to call it a PNG, or we're going to save it as a PNG again. I'm going to make sure it's in the file folder that I created earlier. We're going to call this model 2 since we have model 1 done. So let's save that and we should be good to go. Exit there. I'm just going to make sure my files are showing up in that folder. I don't want it to be an issue later on. So let us see what we have. Looks like I only have one there. Looks like our model 1 down here did not get into the file. We're going to go and put that in the big tutorial. So we should have our model 1 and our model 2. All right. Go back into my shaded view. So from here on out, I'm going to fast forward the video because it's going to be the same procedure for each scene. But again, it's going to be generating our line work from that and then generating an image to put below there that shows some shadowing. So with that said, I'm going to go through, do a little fast forward so this video is not an hour and a half long. I'll see you on the other side. Before I go into the fast forward mode, I'm going to show you a helpful trick to manipulate some of these cubic forms fairly easy. If we go into our solid tools area, there's something called turn on solid control points. If we have our objects selected that we want those control points to show for, we can click those on and you can see these corner nodes show up in the scene. If we click those, we can actually manipulate our surface in kind of a weird or a unique way. I'm going to bring these two corners up 2.5 inches to kind of give us a unique roof structure. So again, I'm going to move those 2.5 inches up. You can do whatever you want that you see fit for your fictitious building. But that's what I'm going to do for simple manipulation. That's going to be the only thing that's kind of different right now. So with that being said, I'm going to go into fast forward and get these lines exported and our backdrops exported. All right, now we should have all the information that we're going to be needing to go into Illustrator to create these drawings. So we have our starting phase over here with the cube. We split it, moved it down. The arrow is indicating that it is shifting downward. We used our control points on these corners and moved them up. These arrows show that it's moving up. We have these platforms that are being kind of extruded from the volume, pulled in one direction. And then for our final one, I just put on some little teeny doors and windows to kind of give it a little bit more of a building sense. So we're going to utilize these right now as our line weights. I have all of our base imagery in the PNG form exported into the file format. And with that being said, we should almost be ready to go. I'm going to select all of my line work right here. I'm going to File, Export selected. I want to export it as an Adobe Illustrator file. Call it Big Line Work. I'm going to save it in the big folder that I created for it. Remember, organization helps you a lot in architecture. And let's save it there. All of this should be completely fine. The snapshot of current view is fine. If you need to in the future preserve a model scale where 1 inch equals whatever, it's totally viable there. Let's export that. So we have our line weights, we have our images already done. Now we can move over to Illustrator and create some diagrams. All right, now let's go and do some Illustrator work on the line work and the images that we exported from Rhino. So let's open our Illustrator. I'm going to create an 18-inch by 18-inch document. I think a square format would work well. We have 5 images. I'm going to put one image in each corner and then the final image in the center. That kind of describes the project a little bit. It might be better in a more linear format, but I think it might be a little too long with those 5 images. So I'm going to create a new document. Over here, you can make sure that you have points, picas, inches, whatever you want to base your document in. I'm going to go with inches. I have 18 by 18 inches set up. We'll create a new document. I'm going to go to our file. I'm going to open the AI file that we have for our big line work. So we have all that here. Right away, I'm going to come into this layer. I'm going to select everything on that layer with this target button. So all of those white lines for the grid are selected. I'm going to go over to our stroke options, and I'm going to make sure that it is completely black so I can see those lines a little bit better. So we'll do lines there. Now we can see that they're black. They're ready to go. I'm going to have all these selected, and I'm going to drag them over to our Illustrator file that is 18 by 18 because I don't know what this size is. But before we can do that, we want to make sure that these layers are still retained when we drag and drop from different documents. So over in our layer panel, in this drop-down menu right here, if we select paste remembers layers, it's going to be very important. So now when we go back in, we can see that it's selected. Now when we drag this into a different document, all of our layers are going to be retained, which is fantastic. Just going to exit out of this one right now and work exclusively with the document that we had just made. I'm going to increase the size of these so we can kind of see them a little bit better. And then I'm going to change the stroke over here to all of them just 0.25 right away, just so they're not super heavy when I'm trying to trace some of this stuff out. So now that we have all of these ready to go, I'm going to make sure that, let's see, make sure that they're just a little bit larger. I'm going to kind of organize them slightly right now so I can kind of understand what's going on. So I kind of want to put these action phases in each corner. And then our final image, I want it to be kind of centered, but I also want to increase its size so it has a larger appearance. So right away we have all this going on. One of the big things is we're going to have a building silhouette that goes around the building and not necessarily the topography. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to lock all these layers real quick. Let's say maybe I'm going to get rid of that grid so it's a lot easier to work with our building silhouettes. And remember our base right here, it's that pink one. I'm going to work within this layer because that's our bottom building edge right there. So we'll have that unlocked and visible. I'm going to go to our pen tool over here. And what that's going to do is help us finish tracing out these building edges. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to go through and kind of finish out the building edge. If you want from Rhino, you can also just export the building edges from the building with the silhouette function, but you can't have the topography be the exterior, so it takes a little bit finessing. But for right now, we're just going to trace out our building edges real quick using the pen tool. All right, so now we can see that we have a complete silhouette. I'm going to select that and show you guys a little bit more control. Let's just make these really thick. Let's say 2 for the final is going to be awesome. I'm going to change this stroke over here to black so I can see how it's reading in its final form. And then right now you can see that the stroke is actually right in the middle of our line. We have these align stroke commands. So if this is a completely closed stroke, we can go over here and align the stroke to the outside. So it's exactly on the exterior of our lines. And we can do a little corner control. Right now we have a rounded corner. I want it to be a little harder edged. So if we do that corner, we can see that we have a hard edge to kind of work with right there. And that looks pretty decent for the exterior. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, trace out the rest of these building silhouettes, and we'll go from there. All right, now that we're done with our building silhouettes, I'm going to just make our arrows a little bit more visible. So right now they should be individual lines. I want to join all of those, so make sure everything else is locked and only the layer for arrows is open. I'm going to select all those, go over to our object, down to path and join. And what that'll do is create a kind of a closed line weight right there. I'm actually going to flip the stroke so that the fill is completely red. I'll do the same thing for this arrow over here. Object, path, join, and then with this button, flip the stroke to the fill. So that's how we're going to do our red arrows. All right, now I'm going to go in and I want that grid to be a little less aggressive. So instead of it being a black, I'm going to make sure that it's more of a gray. I'm going to go back into our stroke. I'm just going to say, let's see what 100 in both, or in all the RGB looks like. Maybe 150. Just a little lighter. There, I'm liking that. I'm liking that a lot. All right, so we got that grid out of the way. We have our scene silhouette, our arrow, our grid, the line work on the exterior. Let's see. So our line work on the exterior, at least the surface, I still want it to read as black. So I'm going to go in and make sure that they are all black. There we are. It's starting to read very nice. Our building information on the interior. Let's go to that layer. I want that line work to be a little bit more apparent because we have a 2 point or a 1.75 on the exterior. Let's see what a 0.75 looks like. I'd say that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to change that also to black just because black's going to read very nice in here. So from the starting point, it looks like we're doing well. Now I'm going to import our PNGs so we can start to size them up and get them lined up with our line work. I'd say for now this is looking great. We have our starting action phases to show how this thing's created. Our final image right here after we get our PNGs on there and kind of situated correctly. Then we'll go in and we'll populate some of this with some small trees and figures. So let's go through and just go to place. I'm going to select model 1 through model 4 PNG and I'm going to create a new layer for that. Put that on the bottom and I'm going to call this just pictures. So we have that selected. Now I'm just going to place these 4 images. We can kind of see a little bit of a chatter on the exterior. We can go into Photoshop in a second to kind of clean up that exterior, which will be an option. But for right now, I'm just going to place these in position to where I think that they should exist. So this one is our, looks like our finished one. I'm going to just kind of size it appropriately. This might take some time to kind of get them looking and reading right, but let's just see how fast we can do this. So right now I'm going to fast forward and just get these images placed correctly behind them before we start to do anything else. We have those placed. I'm actually going to open these up in Photoshop and I'm going to clean up these edges so we only have the information that we want. Even though this is a transparent background, the shadows we're still carrying through. So I'm going to go into Photoshop real quick and just clean those up. All right, so let's open Photoshop real quick to clean up some of those PNGs that we had. So Photoshop's opening right now. And we're just going to open all 4 of those images that we had created. So let's come over. Open all 4 of those. This will just be a quick cleanup. So what we're going to want to do is come over to our selection tool. I'm going to do quick selection tool. And I'm just going to drag this around until it kind of automatically selects what I want. You got to be careful because sometimes it doesn't do it as great as you would like it to. I'm going to decrease the size so I can get this shadow selected quite well. So there we go. We have everything selected. Oops, let's get that selected. So everything on the interior is what we want, including the shadow. I'm going to go up to select here and inverse select. So it's going to select everything surrounding my object, and I can click delete. And what that does is it takes all that chatter that we saw earlier away from our image. And we're going to do that to every single one of these images right now. So I'm going to deselect this right now. That's looking really good. I'm going to file, and I'm going to save that again. And that's just going to save it under the PNG that we worked with. I'm going to fast forward through all this. So use your selection tool right here. Select your object. Go over to select right here. Inverse select, so it's everything surrounding the image that you had selected. And then just delete that out. Let's fast forward it real quick. All right, now that we have all of those cleaned up, I'm just going to exit out of here. Make sure that you had saved every PNG that you wanted. We can exit out of there. I'm going to go back into Illustrator. And right now, because we changed those images that were already in our document, it says some files are missing or modified. Would you like to update them? Click yes. And what you can see is that chatter went away, and now we have some just really clean looking background images. So now that we have that done, I don't like how aggressive they are. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to select all of our images. I'm going to go to their properties, and over in the opacity, I'm going to see what a 20% opacity looks like. Maybe that's a little too light. Let's go up, see what a 40% looks like. I think 40% is looking fairly decent. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go through, I think these building lines need to be a little bit more apparent. So I'm going to go into this layer right here. Oops, I'm going to make sure that these are actually on my picture layer. Right now it's not saying that they are. So I'm just going to grab this little cube right here, drag all that information down into that area. We can turn those off. I'm just going to go through and change those interior line weights to be a little heavier. Maybe 1 point will read a little easier. Ah, there we go. That looks great. Now that we kind of have these in position, I'm going to kind of decorate a little bit. I'm going to create a new layer real quick. I'm going to call this scale figures. Make sure all the other lines are out of here. I'm just going to go in to our ellipse, create a little circle, do a little line right here, create an object like that. For this, I'm going to flip, so the fill is the important part. I'm going to go into here, and let's just kind of mess around with our settings here in the color swatches. Let's go get some green. Kind of want it to be a little bit more lime green. And I don't want a stroke on this one. I'm just going to say, oops, I'm going to say no stroke option there. So now we have these little teeny trees that we can kind of populate the area. Let's make this line weight just a little bit thicker. That's reading well. All right. So now I'm going to, let's go to edit and group these so we can kind of copy or object group rather. So now we can kind of move these around and populate our final image over here with some scale figure trees. And I'm going to make sure that this is in front of all of our information. I'm just going to copy and paste a few. As many as you feel necessary. And then I'm just going to kind of go through, change the size on this so it kind of varies it, makes it a little bit more dynamic. And then we can just go around and place them where we feel necessary. Like I said, you guys can have fun with it. You can put little teeny human scale figures, which I'll show you in a second. So looking at that right now, it's starting to read a little bit more like big. Let's get some scale figures on there just to have a little bit more fun. So I actually have some scale figures that I've saved. Just going to go to my desktop. Let's see which folder I put them in. There's a scale figure. And let's just do man walking. I'm going to open that real quick. I'm going to only use the outer, and I'm going to have the fill be black. And you can find scale figures online pretty much wherever you can find them. So I'm just going to drag this guy over since I'm already in my scale figure area. I'm going to make this scaled probably to the size of the door because that's going to be kind of like an average human size. And I don't really want a stroke on here, so I'm going to get rid of the stroke on here. And I'm going to copy and paste a few of these to kind of populate the image. And with that being said, that's big diagrammatic drawings in a nutshell. We can format this however we want. So if we want to put our grid on, make sure that these are where we want them to be. So we can just kind of select everything here. Let's say I want an inch margin for these corner ones. And that's what my grid is set up right now. Each one of these squares is an inch. So I have an inch on this edge, an inch on this edge. I'm going to do the same for over here. Make sure you have everything selected over there. And with the arrow keys, I'm just moving it into position wherever we need to be. All right, and there is our final image. Hopefully you'll have fun with this. Like I said, the building that I made is a fictitious building. I generated it fairly quickly within Rhino. Have fun with it. Do something interesting. If you have any questions, obviously give us some email. But that, in a nutshell, is BARC Ingalls Group diagrammatic drawing tutorial.